Please welcome Pastor Michael.
Thanks so much, Johanna. Well, good morning, everybody. It's great to see you, and thank you all so much for coming today. I am going to be speaking about something that I've wanted to talk about probably for a few years, at least. It's a topic that is actually honestly very difficult to talk about, but for some reason or another kept coming up recently in my life, and I just felt like, well, maybe this is the time. So the title of my sermon today is called Recreating Our Culture. About a week ago, I had the opportunity to have lunch with a young couple. It was a really nice experience. And they don't have children yet, so they asked me, what's the biggest challenge, raising children? Of course, our children are very young yet, so maybe we haven't experienced the greater challenges of raising kids. But the challenges that we have experienced, we kind of went back and forth a little bit, and we ended up recognizing that the biggest challenge that we recognize in children, raising children, is that your children mirror you. They reflect you, I guess you could say. Our good points and our not so good points, and the way we say things, and also that you can't hide anything from your kids. Even though our children are still very young, we've already come to recognize that, they notice things. They're very, very aware. And they may not necessarily say, hey, Dad, how come you tell me to have, I can only have time to play games like 30 minutes a day at this time, but you just get on and play whenever you feel like it on your phone, How come you're sitting there? How come I can't watch, YouTube, but you're watching like fail videos, or they don't necessarily say those kinds of things, but I feel surely, they're watching and they're noticing all these kind of things. And me and Adonia have both commented before how much we've noticed that our kids, oftentimes when they're misbehaving, or like if they're talking in a way that upsets me, like say for example, one of my kids is kind of talking condescendingly towards one of the other kids, like, don't do that, why are you doing that, or something like that. Then we oftentimes reflect and oftentimes recognize that actually, where are they getting that? They're getting that from maybe me in a moment of frustration, or if I'm not having a good day, and I'll say things like that. And then sure enough, somewhere down the road, they repeat and they absorb these kinds of things. So, it's not something to beat yourself up about, but it's a very humbling thing to recognize that, we, especially in family, when you're living together 24/7 and you see each other all the time, and it's just that kind of relationship. You can't hide anything or keep anything from anybody. And it's a very confronting thing for a parent, because you recognize that if you want to raise your kids a certain way, then you have to be a certain way. If you want to have certain expectations of the way you want your kids to be, although there's no guarantees, but at the very minimum, we have to try to live that way as well. We have to be in integrity with what we are asking of others. And that in and of itself is a very confronting thing for a parent or for anybody. The same thing, I think, can happen in a corporate environment or an educational environment, school, a church, a business. Leadership filters down into the people, because if you're the boss, then your employees get a certain idea of what's acceptable and what's unacceptable based on what's allowed from the top down. So I was thinking about our movement in this context. And I was thinking about, I've grown up in this faith, I've grown up in this movement all my life, and even though I grew up in Wyoming, where we didn't have a church, many times we would have Sunday service in our living room, and my dad would get up and he would lead the songs, and, we would read something, and he would give a sermon. We did this for quite a while. We also visited other churches, and actually my dad even started a church with another pastor at one point that we got kicked out of. But we had so many neat experiences. And even though I grew up geographically distant from our church, local church here, nothing is really distant anymore, you know? It's only getting more so as time goes and technology increases. Even when I was, even though many things that exist now, like virtual reality and Skype and, these kind of things that allow for real-time communication and almost like, I have this virtual reality headset kind of thing, and it's got this social media app, kind of like your regular app, but instead of you're on Facebook and you're seeing different people, you're actually literally walking around with this headset on, looking at people who are those people, but they might be halfway around the world, And the technology is very primitive now, but it won't be long before I'll be standing in front of Roger, or I'll be standing in front of Lorette, and it'll look like it's them, and it'll talk like it's them, and it will be hard to tell the difference. But it'll all be digital, it'll all be cyber. That day is probably only a few years away. So that's really cool, but 15 years ago, even still there was, like you could chat with people on email, and the world was already starting to come closer at that time. And so nothing is really far apart anymore, and it's getting to be more so as time goes by. And, I would go to workshops, California, sometimes here in Colorado, come to Holy Day ceremonies, God's Day, and different kind of events, different get-togethers. And so even though I didn't grow up in the community, I had the opportunity to experience it coming from the outside in many times. And I recognized that, kind of interestingly, looking back on my experience growing up in our movement, of course, just like everybody, I was taught the divine principle. I was taught about, our founders, Reverend Mrs. Moon, and culture parents. I was taught about what is the meaning of living a principled life, what is our purpose as human beings, where are we trying to go, what's the purpose of history, all these things. But I also recognize that I learned those things. I learned those intellectual things, but I also learned it experientially. Did I say that right? Experientially. I don't even know if that's a word, but I learned that way. And it's kind of like the way our kids learn. We tell our kids a certain thing, right? We teach our kids, how to relate with other people, how you should relate with your parents, how you should relate with your siblings, how you should relate in the world when you're at school, what kind of person you want them to become. You want them to become a good person, right? Make good choices, become successful, all these different things, right? I think that most parents want for their kids, and we try to impart on them. We want them to be better than us. We want them to be more accomplished than us. We want them to have more successes than we had. We even want them to succeed in the areas that maybe we failed in. That's the heart of a parent, right? It's the heart of God. But our kids also, maybe they hear those words from us, but they also learn through experiencing, right? They experience the culture in our family. They experience the emotion and the motivation behind the words, right? We know that we can say one thing, but our heart's not always in it. Our intentions aren't always the best. Sometimes I'll tell my kids to do something, but in the back of my head, I can feel my emotion or my motivation is more because I'm annoyed, and I just want them to go do something else, than that I really, as a parent, want them to, have a valuable life lesson or something like that. I don't know. Sometimes I make excuses, and I think that our kids feel that, and they sense that we all have our shortcomings, but we live in a world where we have ideals, especially in our faith. We have very high ideals and very high intentions of what kind of people we want to be and what kind of world we want to create. But we oftentimes in our own personal lives fall very short of that. And there's no blame to go around or no accusation to be made. It's just the reality. We all have these shortcomings. We all fall very short of, many times, even really basic standards. And I think that many times in our families, kids can get really frustrated about that. You know, why are my parents asking me to live a certain way when they're not really living a certain way? Or was that really what he was trying to say, or was that really what she was trying to say, or were they just trying to get me to go away or something like that? And I feel like many times in our own faith community, these kind of same things can happen. And I recognize that growing up, even though I didn't grow up here physically, but in my experience has been very interesting in that we learn the divine principle, we learn the life that our true parents lived, we learn what is the ideal, we learn about four fallen natures, we learn about give and take act, we learn all these things, we learn about restoration, right? But how much is it being lived in our own individual lives? How much is it being embodied in our families? And how much is it a part of the culture in our community? These are the aspect that's not what's being said. These aren't the words that we're telling our children or that we're telling our guests or our friends. They're not necessarily the ideals, but they are the experience. When a person comes to your home, when a person spends time with you, when a person comes to your church, to our church, and visits our community, what's their experience? Not what are they being told is the ideal or what we, of course that's obviously fundamentally important, right? We have to recognize that there is something that we're trying to accomplish that's bigger than ourselves, even if we fall short of that. And we have to try to live up to it no matter what shortcomings we may have. But we also have to be honest and look at our families and ourselves and our communities and recognize, where are the shortcomings and what kind of culture are we really creating? Because even though growing up, I learned the divine principle to a certain degree, I learned it to the degree that a teenager could understand it or whatever, based on my own effort. And I learned our ideals and I learned certain things. But my experience of the culture was oftentimes oftentimes very kind of just shocking or disappointing to me. And I wanted to bring this is why this point is so difficult for me to talk about, because, well, I guess I'll get into that in a minute. There's a word. Okay, so let me go back. So when I talk about culture, what I am getting at is not so much maybe food or music. I'm more talking about relationships. How husband and wife are relating to one another, how parents and children are relating to one another, how different members in our community are relating to one another and treating each other. And also in terms of our church, we have like a structure, right? Organization. How do the members relate with the leadership? And also how do leadership relate to the members? And to be honest, I've oftentimes, even to this day, have been heartbroken by the way that I've seen people treat each other. And the way that I've seen, especially as a pastor now, I kind of have a very unique perspective because, I have the opportunity to relate with everybody. I don't really have a choice. Not that I don't want to, but it's just like part of my job, right? And I get to see so many different dynamics and get to hear so many different people's perspectives on their life in the movement and how things have been for them and their experiences and what's been great and what's been very challenging, honestly. And one of the things that I see many, 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 many times is the B word. Does anyone know what the B word is? Bad? No. Bigger? Is that what someone said? Not bigger. Behavior? Not behavior. Not bigot. Come on. What is that? Bastard. No. Come on, guys. Oh. All right, we're going downhill here. Backstabbing. No, not. All right, you guys are. I'm looking for a little bit more of a, not sharp, but not bystanders. That's a good word. Bias is a good word. That's not it. These are all good answers. No, I really want to hear someone say it. No. I think we're getting closer. Because, no. Brother, no. All right. No. All right, I give up. All right, the word that I see a lot, okay, is blame. Blame. All right, good. Sometimes I'll go to an event and someone will come to me and they'll, because I'm a young person and because I'm a pastor, people feel comfortable to ask me about why aren't other young people doing what I'm doing. And sometimes someone will come up to me and they'll just be like, you look like you get it. Why don't these other young people, why don't they just get it? They don't get it. I'm like, okay, that's a long conversation. But more than the words, the feeling I get is, why aren't they doing what they should be doing? If they're the future, why aren't they stepping up and doing what they should be doing? Doesn't that sound a little bit like blame? That's what I feel. That's honestly what I feel when somebody will come. This has happened more than once in the last few years. When someone comes to me and says things like that. And, I get that where these people are coming from is they're not trying to place blame. It's not like their heartfelt desire, But what oftentimes happens in a situation where we have, lack of forward progress, or stagnation, or frustration, or in the case of our movement over the past many years, many heartbreaking experiences, feelings of betrayal, feelings of disappointment. We've had many, many, many amazingly good things happen, and I don't want to give a bad impression to some of our guests. So many good things have happened in our movement, right? We've accomplished so many fantastic, amazing things, and we have many saints sitting in this room today and in our movement, nationally and worldwide. But we also have to recognize there's been a lot of shortcomings too, and there's been a lot of blame because of the things that have happened in our movement that have just broken people's hearts and disappointed people. And it's not easy to come to a place where I, as a member of the Family Federation, of the Unification Church, can take responsibility for something that happened 3,000 miles away, Even though that's what we're taught to do by our founders, to always take responsibility, even in the most difficult, heartbreaking situation. Maybe you had nothing to do with it. Maybe you have no fault whatsoever. But we're taught, right, that we take responsibility because that's the only way that we can maintain God's perspective on a situation. So obviously, we are not the only group of people that has blame as an issue in our community, right? This is a universal, human experience, and something that people deal with in all walks of life. In your very personal, myself and my wife and my husband and my children walk of life. And we know that because, well, obviously it's all over the world. You can't hardly avoid seeing it anymore, but we also know that that's the way things are because we don't live in the world that God originally intended for us. We don't live in this original world. And I had a conversation with my cousin earlier this week. It was about an hour-long conversation. It basically involved me sitting there while he told me that I was going to hell. And it was a very interesting conversation. turn it off and it won't turn on again. Thank you. Yes. That was a little bit of a hard conversation for me to sit through, but it's as a unificationist and having this understanding that we have about God and His ideal for humanity. There was many times I wanted to just tell him that this world that we live in wasn't God's plan. God didn't want for us to have to live in this world full of corruption and fighting and poverty and death and suffering. We live in it, we don't have a choice, but that wasn't God's plan. And to me, that makes a lot of sense, but I know that it doesn't to everybody. But I just wanted to scream it out, but it was one of those one-sided conversations. But, we know that God originally had a plan. God had this beautiful world He wanted to create, and beautiful people and beautiful families, a world without all the problems that we have now. But we know that because of the fall, because Lucifer, even though he was God's right-hand man, for millions or billions or however many years it took to make creation, he was there with God, worked hand in hand with God, was God's right-hand guy, helping him to create everything. And we know that once Adam and Eve came along, Lucifer saw that and he just felt like, we don't know exactly how he felt, but according to our what's been told to us by our founders is that Lucifer felt bitter. He felt angry. He felt resentful. He felt like God doesn't love me anymore. He doesn't need me anymore. He's got these children who don't know how to do anything, and they're like, they're just like, they know nothing. And I'm the archangel, the right hands of God who has millions of angels underneath me. And he couldn't take it. He couldn't handle it. He couldn't absorb that. He couldn't look at it from the eyes of God and really try to have God's heart on his children and try to raise them up and be God's helpers. And he couldn't recognize that he was destined to be more loved when those children matured. And so he went against God and he did his own thing and he decided to take that love for himself. And because of that, we have what are called the four fallen natures, as most of you know. And the first fallen nature is not seeing from God's point of view. And we talk about the first fallen nature probably more than any of the other fallen natures. I don't really think we actually talk about the other ones that much at all, actually. And there's a reason for that, because you don't get the other three if you don't do the first one. The other three wouldn't have happened for Lucifer if he hadn't done the first one. If he had just been able to see from God's point of view from the beginning, and if he had just been able to accept that these are God's beloved children, and God has a plan for them, and I'm going to help God and support God and love them like God loves them, even if I don't understand, and even if I feel kind of empty, then the blessing would have been there for him. So for us, too, we have to really think about our mindset. Of course, it's important to look at our actions and our words. But where do actions and words come from? Originally, they come from in here. They come from our mind. They come from the way we think, the way we look at people, and the way that we look at situations. They eventually get expressed through our words. Even if in our mind, let's say, for example, I'm feeling really judgmental towards somebody, what comes to mind is, because I don't want to use anyone here in the community, but an old leader of mine back in the day, I didn't like the way he did things. And I thought he was a bad leader. I almost thought he was just like a bad person. And he was a very well-meaning, good-intentioned person, but my vision and my mindset was just clouded, and I was very, very judgmental towards him. And even though I would try sometimes to go to him and talk to him and be like, hey, how's your day going, or how are your kids, and different things like that. I try to be very diplomatic, but because my mind was judgmental, it always came out in the feeling behind the words, right? Have you had that experience before where someone's talking to you and they're saying the right words, but you feel something? if you feel something behind the words, it's not quite right. We're not just physical people that have conversations. We are emotional, spiritual beings. We sense things. Not always true. Sometimes we have a bias and we think that the world's out to get us, but it's really not. But many times we can sense the intention, the motivation, the feeling behind the words. And this is what, and when you have enough people who are thinking and acting and speaking a certain way, then that's the culture that you create, whether it's in your family or whether it's in your community or whether it's in your nation or whatever level of society that we're talking about. So fundamentally, even though, like I said, it's important that we look at our words, it's important that we look at our actions, but more fundamentally than that, if we look at the divine principle and we look at the process through which the fall happened, we have to look at our mind. We have to look at our way of thinking, the way that we perceive the world, the way that we perceive people, the way we perceive ourselves. In our mind, what are we thinking? And this is very confronting for me to even talk about this topic, because you talk about the topic of blame, and the finger points right back at you. This is the danger of public speaking, in case you didn't know, especially in this kind of an environment. I had to take a walk this morning because I was having a real hard time to digest my own message, if that makes sense. I was like, how can I even talk about this? Because I can feel somewhere in me, there's some blame. I feel there's some frustration there. There's some, when I talk about my experience growing up in our movement and seeing these things, that dichotomy or the many times not living up to our own standards. There's a part of me that hasn't fully 100% come to peace with that. And, of course, maybe I'm at home arguing with my wife or arguing with my kids, these kind of things. Make it very hard to even bring this up as a public topic. So how much am I, in my own heart and mind, really at peace with the people in my life or with this world? I think that there's none of us, all of us here have a certain aspect of that within ourselves that we need to look at. We need to look at where am I? Where do I feel, I have unresolved situations, unresolved feelings towards, might even be somebody who's not even alive anymore. But if I had to think of one thing that really has been damaging to our movement and to our faith, and pushed many of our young people away, I'd have to say this is probably one of the big ones. And so, since we know that this was not God's plan, then we know that this part of us that has these feelings isn't part of the way we should be. And that's a good thing, right? We can recognize that, actually, it's not natural for me to be this way. Actually, isn't it very painful? Isn't it very painful to experience these kind of anger and frustration and unresolved feelings towards family members, towards people that we actually really want to love? That actually, many times we feel the most hurt and the most anger towards the people that we look up to, respect, we love. They're our blood kin, they're our blood family, right? Because many times those are the people that hurt us the most, because we love them so much, we trust them. But because we know that this was not God's original plan, then we can delve into God's word. We can delve into the things that have been given to us by our founders. And we can understand what was God's original plan. What is the way I should be as a person? And we can look at these fallen natures, and we can look at the words that our true parents have given us, and we can recognize that how we can become more whole people, how we can become more, how we can not just not see from, how we can not just not see from God's point of view, but what is God's point of view anyway? That's like, even people don't even talk about that. Like, what does God think? Oh, we don't even know, right? Most people? I mean, who even talks about that? I mean, you could, in some circles, even if you make the statement that you know what God thinks or what God wants, it's almost like heresy. It is. Which is why what we have is hard for some people to digest, but I think it's liberating. I think it's very liberating because we can know God through the creation. It's very common sense, right? We can know God through us because he created us. And we can know God's plan through looking at things like nature. As Mother said in the video, nature didn't fall. We can see a lot of the way God wanted humanity to live just by looking at the harmony and beauty in nature. But it's not easy growing up in this world. We go through lots of different experiences, and it's hard to sometimes, I mean, we know that we need to let go sometimes, but, that was my journey this morning. I'm walking around the neighborhood, and I'm thinking to myself, what does this mean for me? I can recognize that I have, frustrations and resentments, but what does that mean for me? How do I let go of that? How do I actually begin to see the way that God, sees? How do I have that parental heart towards, my family, towards my members, towards, people that I meet on the street, or towards this nation? How do I have God's heart in that respect? And so, I mean, it's a bit of an individual journey that we all have to go on, right? But we have amazing tools. We have amazing tools that actually many people don't have. I mean, just the fact that we have the words from our founders and the divine principle and speeches and things like that teach us so clearly what was the process through which human beings fell away from God. And we can get a sense of how we come back to God. And what does God want us to be like? And what is the parental heart of God? How does God see this world? We have to delve into God's word. We have to read it on a daily basis. And we have to put it into practice in our lives. It's the only way. Just like blame was never a part of God's original plan, blame doesn't have any place in the principle. It doesn't have any place in our lives. I was thinking about how if I look back on my life and I see all the dark times, the times where I was darkest, when I was most felt, I guess, distant from God and distant from people, blame was there. Blame is very dark, and it was there. Always my blaming somebody or something. May have been the church, may have been God, may have been my parents, may have been my wife, may have been my kids. I don't know, there's lots of people you could blame, right? Could be your boss, could be the homeless people in the park, could be people in government. There's endless number of people you can blame for everything, right? But it's such a dark place. It's such a dark place because it's not God's perspective. And I really believe God doesn't blame anybody. God doesn't blame anybody or anything. And so, for us, even though sometimes we feel like we have a reason to blame, like, this wasn't my fault. But, like I said earlier, the only way that we can keep the perspective of God in our lives and really, I believe, I realize this ideal that God gave for us is to let go of those things. And to focus on what is my responsibility, what is my purpose, what is my vision in my life, what can I do with my life to make those things better, and then just kind of focus on those things. And we can see blame in the original, in the Bible, we can see. In the Bible it says in Genesis, the man said, "The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me the fruit of the tree and I ate." Sound a little bit like blaming to me. Then the Lord God said to the woman, "What is this that you have done?" And the woman said, "The serpent deceived me and I ate." Blame again. But later on in the Bible, in Matthew, it says, "Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when there is a log in your own eye? And then it goes on to say something that I never really noticed before. First time for me. Maybe you've all noticed it before, but I never have. But it goes on to say, you hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. That's a really beautiful, actually, statement there. I never noticed it before because, I don't know, somehow we always focus on the log, the log thing. And then, but then they're saying, but if you can take that log out of your own eye, then you can help other people. That's beautiful, right? It's not just like, well, don't judge because you're bad, but it's like, go, yes, help other people. Be their salvation, their help, raise them up in their life, help them to overcome their hurdles. But in order to do that, you have to take that log out of your own eye first. We have to come to peace within ourselves first. We have to deal with the things that we have to deal with first. And I thought, yeah, that kind of sums it up. So that's my message today. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Pastor Michael. Now it's time for our announcement, but I'm going to invite first Mr. Roger up for an important announcement.
Good morning. First, I want to talk about a special person who was always involved in the church, who always was there when we were doing voluntary work, worked harder than anybody, was in every committee I can think of, and has a special place in my heart and in a special place in everyone's heart who was here. He's with us for one day today, and that's John Redmond. I want to speak briefly this morning about the survey we're sending out, evaluating our pastors by the members. We will have a meeting after church in the Welcome Center on September the 3rd at 1 o'clock. This will last for 1 hour. This will give everyone an opportunity to give their opinion on our pastors, their performance, and also to give your congratulations to them on the successes that they have, which are very many. So much so that people are literally moving across this country to come here. And I believe it's because of them. Thank you, Peggy. I'm getting there. I'll get there. When you might remember when Pastor Mike and Pastor Donia first came here 3 years ago, one of the first things they did was to send out a survey on what we want to accomplish, which I thought was a great idea. The survey that we're going to be printing out and sending out is different in that it is an evaluation of our pastors. Please fill out this survey. This is very important. Again, this is very important. We need every one of you to respond. The council will then review every one of the return surveys. Again, I may have said this, but it's important. Now is the time for you to speak up and give your opinion. Every one of you is a valuable part of our community, and we need your opinions and your suggestions. So please come to this meeting. How many remember when we used to have community meetings downstairs and we used to put all the chairs in a circle and everyone got a chance to vote? And those were very productive. And we're going to do the same thing in the Welcome Center. We're going to put all the chairs in a circle and everyone gets a chance to speak their opinion. The reason we put the chairs in a circle is to remind us that we're all equal. The real power of the church is you. It's not the building. It's the people in the building. And when God looks at us, what he's looking at is each and every one of us, and as a group. It's nice to have a beautiful church. It's nice to have a wonderful place to visit with each other, but more importantly, God looks at our heart. And so our first challenge is to always unite our mind and our body. On the 27th, we will have this survey printed out, and we'll have it in the back of the sanctuary. Please take time to fill it out. You can even fill it out that day and give it to us that day, because the sooner we get it, the faster we can make a decision on moving forward. Or you can fill it out online and send it back to us via email. Again, the faster you get them back to us, the more time we'll have to make a decision. We will evaluate them and incorporate them into our decision to reinstate Pastors Mike and Adonia for 3 more years or not. So this is very important. Thank you for listening to me, and God bless every one of you.
Thank you. Okay. So that was last week when the young kids went on camping. It looks like they had fun. Okay. Starting today at 1 p.m., Mr. Ken will be presenting on divine principle and health. Today's section will be on health, ginseng, and water. That will be in the Welcome Center. And on Monday, he will be speaking on divine principle, health, and social health. Societal health, And on Tuesday, he will be speaking on ultimate health, healing, mental, and spiritual health. So please see Isako if you have any question. So please sign up with Anissa today if you would like a haircut next Sunday. That's just for women and kids. As for women, sorry. So every Sunday is an opportunity to hear an inspired message from our own Reverend Wantete right here in the French Chapel from 8 to 10, and there will be English translation. And we also have flyers. If you would like to invite somebody, we'll have it at the back, that table there, so you can take some. Yeah, it's the best. So here is the schedule for the upcoming 4 days and 7 days Divine Principle workshops in Las Vegas. So please let our pastors know if you are interested in attending. I'm going to invite Gail and Shirley up for this announcement. Okay, just Gail.
Hi, everyone. Women's Federation for World Peace USA is running a national fundraiser for a school, much-needed school in Nepal. Please support Luna's Kinderworld in Nepal. Last year, one of our blessed families started a pre-K and kindergarten in rural Nepal to provide quality education based on love without the corporal punishment practiced in many schools in Nepal. WFWP USA is currently raising money to help them build the facilities they need in order to move out of their temporary residence in the family's living room. Please read more about their story, donate, and share with family and friends at www.fundly.com, WFWP Plunis. Even $25 or $50 makes a big difference. $25 buys a stack of bricks. Checks can be made out to WFWP USA, and I'll be in the back with my little basket and also downstairs. But do we also have that little video to run? Okay. So you can see the school is important because from that Constitution, they talked about torture and corporal punishment. Sounds like it can be quite severe there. So this is a blessed couple that started the school, alternative of just love and support for these children. So again, checks could be made out to WFWP USA. I'll be in the back and downstairs. So thank you for whatever you can give.
Thank you. The 5th anniversary of our founder's passing will be on Thursday, September 7th, and further details will be made available as we make a more clear plan on how to celebrate this occasion. We don't know yet. Okay. Please consider where you can give of your time. We need help in all the following areas. So please see Pastor Michael for further details or if you have any question. Next week, the Hendrick family is cleaning and the Fleischer family are ushering and serving lunch. And I have one more announcement from Mr. Roger. The Finance Committee have a meeting today at the Welcome Center after lunch, right? Would that be after? Oh, sorry? Sorry, I can't hear you.
I just wanted to announce that the new subcommittee, Finance Subcommittee, is meeting after lunch in the side chapel. Okay, thank you, Pastor Mike, thank you. So, forget what I said. We'll be meeting in the Prince room. Thank you.
Thank you. Please let's stand for our final song.